On a rainy Monday morning in Manhattan, September 15, 2008, the world shifted beneath our feet. Outside the towering Lehman Brothers headquarters, cameras flashed, umbrellas shook, and history was made in silence. Inside, the air was thick, not with sound but with disbelief. Employees walked in stunned silence, clutching cardboard boxes, their lives upended in a single breath. Janice, a 42-year-old risk analyst, whispered, "This can't be happening," her voice drowning in the chaos around her. No one answered. She wasn't alone, yet isolation blanketed the room. Papers scattered across trading desks like fallen leaves. Phones rang unanswered. Upstairs in the executive suite, Richard Fuld stood motionless, his reflection on the glass revealing more cracks than confidence. His empire had collapsed overnight. The street outside had no sympathy. News trucks circled like vultures. "Lehman Brothers declares bankruptcy," scrolled across every screen in Times Square. People gasped. The market trembled. And for a brief moment, time froze, not just for a company, but for an entire generation. Before dawn, Lehman Brothers was a titan. One of the oldest investment banks on Wall Street, it had survived civil war, depression, and global conflicts. But it would not survive this. Overnight, 25,000 jobs evaporated. Some employees cried quietly in corners. Others sat at their desks, frozen, not knowing what to do. The firm was more than a job. It was identity, legacy, family. Janice remembered her first day, the pride in her father's eyes. Now, she couldn't even look at her own reflection. Traders stared at screens they could no longer influence. "What happens now?" someone asked, but no one had an answer. In boardrooms, silence replaced ambition. The economy didn't just lose a firm. It lost trust. The ripple was not metaphorical. It was real. Wow. And it had just begun. The collapse wasn't sudden. It had been whispered in boardrooms and murmured in elevators. How? Months of poor investments, toxic assets, and blind ambition had hollowed Lehman from within. But the world only noticed when it fell. Wall Street believed itself immortal. Too big, too wise, too powerful. Lehman proved otherwise. The warning signs were there. Analysts warned of unstable subprime mortgage exposure. Executives dismissed them with smiles and bonuses. "We're strong," they said. "This is noise." But it wasn't. It was the sound of a fuse, burning fast. And when the explosion came, it didn't just affect bankers. It reached schools, pensions, savings accounts, everyday people. Janice thought of her son's college fund. She thought of her aging mother's healthcare. Greed didn't just collapse a firm. It cracked the foundation of millions. Inside Lehman's risk department, warnings echoed louder than anywhere else. Models were redlining. Debt exposure was uncontainable. Janice stood before charts that looked more like heart monitors flatlining. She flagged reports. She sent memos. Nothing happened. "Let it ride," a director had said. "It'll bounce back." But it didn't. Now those same men avoided eye contact. Cowards hiding behind silence. She remembered sleepless nights, clutching reports with trembling hands. What use was truth if no one listened? Behind the glass walls, truth suffocated in arrogance. The system didn't fail by accident, it was failed by design. No lifeboats were coming. No heroes either. Just data, warnings, and a deadly silence. The first wave hit the banks. The second hit the people. As Lehman collapsed, shockwaves rippled through pension funds, retirement accounts, and mortgages. Average families woke up to uncertainty. Janice sat on her living room floor at midnight, watching the news with her son asleep on the couch. "We'll be okay," she whispered, more to herself than him. But she didn't believe it. She had done everything right. Worked hard. Played safe. Trusted the system. And the system had collapsed under its own weight. It wasn't just money that vanished. It was security. dignity, faith, fee. A financial storm had turned into a personal reckoning. Janice wasn't just an employee. She was a single mother, a daughter, a friend. The fallout from Lehman's collapse wasn't limited to boardrooms. It spread into living rooms, classrooms, kitchens. That Monday night, she sat with her son over leftover pizza, unable to meet his eyes. "Are we gonna lose our house?" he asked, eyes wide and scared. She smiled faintly and said, "No, baby, I'll fix it." But inside, she didn't know how. Her savings were locked. Her 401k had dropped overnight. Her job was gone. Her reputation was tainted. The world outside whispered about failure, but to her, it screamed survival. It wasn't just about money. It was about everything she had built over decades, dissolving without warning. Friends stopped calling. Emails went unanswered. Shame clung to her like a second skin. She had always lived by the book, followed every rule, but the game had changed, and she hadn't seen it coming. Now, survival wasn't just a hope. It was a war she had no map for. At Lehman, titles meant prestige. Janice had worn hers with pride, senior risk strategist. Now, it felt meaningless. She visited a job fair in Midtown, dressed in her best navy blazer. But her resume now bore the scarlet letter of bankruptcy. Recruiters offered smiles but avoided eye contact when they saw where she'd worked. She waited in line behind younger, eager applicants with cheaper salaries and unblemished LinkedIn profiles. One said, "Lehman? Damn. Sorry." She nodded and looked away. The world moved on, but she was stuck in freeze frame. A once stellar career reduced to footnotes in a financial tragedy. She walked out without handing in a single resume. Her identity, once built around value and performance, had become a cautionary tale. In that moment, she wasn't a strategist or a mother, just another ghost haunting the ruins of Wall Street. The world wanted to forget Lehman. But how do you forget yourself? That weekend, Janice visited her childhood home in Queens. Her mother, now 71, opened the door with a smile that tried to mask concern. "You don't have to say it," she said, hugging her tight. Inside, the warmth was overwhelming. Old curtains, ticking clocks, and the smell of home-cooked stew. Janice crumbled. "I failed," she whispered. Her mother shook her head. "You were betrayed. There's a difference." They sat together, no need for words. This wasn't just a retreat. It was a return to something unshakable. Family. Stability. Love. Love. Even in the ruins of her career, Janice still had anchors. Her son played quietly on the floor. Laughter returned, not loud, but enough to remind them who they were before Wall Street. Outside, the world spun in uncertainty. Inside, it paused, not to forget the pain but to breathe through it. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to rest. In the days that followed, Lehman became a dirty word. On talk shows, in newsrooms, even in cafe corners, people dissected its fall. But few talked about the people inside. Janice watched a congressional hearing on TV, watching executives deflect blame. "We acted responsibly," one declared. Her jaw tightened. That man had ignored her flagged reports for months. That man had smiled in meetings as bonuses were handed out. That man had walked away with millions while she lost everything. "They're untouchable," she muttered. Her son looked up. "Who?" "The men who broke the rules and still won," she replied. The irony was bitter. The ones who warned were punished. The ones who gambled walked away unscathed. It wasn't just unfair, it was rigged. And she knew now. Redemption wouldn't be granted. It would have to be taken. Janice stood in front of a mirror the next morning. No makeup. No blazer. Just herself. She studied the lines on her face, each one earned, none regretted. Her son walked in, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" She smiled. "Not yet, but I will be." That day, she updated her resume. She removed the jargon. She added the truth. Risk manager, predicted 2008 collapse, ignored. It was bold, unapologetic, real. She wasn't going to beg anymore. She had been quiet, professional, careful, and it had cost her everything. Now she would speak, not for sympathy, but for survival. Her fall wasn't a shame. It was proof she stood where cowards wouldn't. And maybe, just maybe, the world would finally listen. If not, she would still stand. Because she remembered now. She was never just part of the system. She was stronger than it. Years before the collapse, Lehman Brothers was at its peak, a cathedral of capitalism. The lobby gleamed with marble, floors buzzed with ambition, and every hallway echoed with confidence. Janice remembered walking through those doors the day she was promoted, heart pounding, heels clicking like a metronome of pride. "You're rising fast," a colleague had said. And she was. But beneath the gleam something rotted. Mortgage-backed securities, stacked like house of cards, portfolios. Internally the culture had shifted, less analysis, more risk. Less doubt, more profit. Everyone's doing it, they said. But no one asked what it was. Janice had sat in meetings where doubts were considered weakness. When she once questioned a model's exposure, silence followed. Then laughter. "Relax, John," someone smirked. "The numbers always bounce. But numbers aren't parachutes. They don't save you when you jump off a cliff." And at Lehman, everyone was leaping. Lehman's power came from risk, the kind no one else dared to take. Traders pushed billions into subprime mortgage bundles, repackaging bad loans into products dressed in misleading names. CDOs, MBS, AA ratings meant nothing, but looked good on paper. Janice watched the analysts nod through slide decks, drinking the Kool-Aid of confidence. Behind the scenes, warnings flickered. Default rates were climbing. Data showed cracks. But profit soared. Bonuses swelled. "If we don't do it, someone else will," a director had told her. Ethics were replaced by equations. The line between brilliance and recklessness blurred. In one meeting, a trader called subprime mortgages gold mines with termites. Everyone laughed. Janice didn't. She saw the rot. But in Lehman's culture, silence was safer than truth. And silence became policy. By 2006, the engine was overheating. Real estate prices skyrocketed. Loan approvals became absurdly easy. No income, no job, no problem. Internally, Lehman's risk models blinked red. Janice filed a formal warning memo. She never got a reply. She followed up. It was buried. Instead, the firm doubled down. More products, more leverage, more blind optimism. One hallway conversation still haunted her. A junior analyst whispered, "We're lying to ourselves, right?" Janice nodded. But we're not allowed to say it. The system wasn't just flawed. It had no brakes. Executives knew the exposure. They just believed they'd exit before it blew up. But markets aren't forgiving. And math, unlike men, tells the truth. The signs were all there. They were just ignored. Then came Bear Stearns. When it collapsed in March 2008, fear swept the street. But Lehman's leadership shrugged. "We're not Bear," they insisted. Press releases were drafted with forced confidence. Investors asked questions. Answers came with spin. Janice sat in stunned silence as internal emails parroted false optimism. They were bleeding billions and pretending to glow. "Trust is perception," one memo read. But trust isn't magic. It's earned. And theirs was fading. Internally, employees whispered about liquidity shortfalls and frozen assets. Externally, the press grew louder. "Are we next?" Janice asked a VP. He smiled without humor. "Only if the truth comes out." It wasn't a joke. It was a warning. Truth, it seemed, was Lehman's final liability. Summer 2008 was a slow-motion disaster. Clients pulled funds. Rumors became headlines. Stock prices wavered like a candle in wind. Janice came in one day to find 3 more desks empty, colleagues gone without notice. They got out, someone whispered. Meetings became grimmer. A risk report showed catastrophic exposure, hundreds of billions in toxic assets. She slid it across the table to a director. He didn't even look up. It's too late now. No rescue plan. No acknowledgement. Just denial wrapped in suits and spreadsheets. Janice stared at the exit door, wondering how many more days they had left. Or hours. The firm wasn't failing. It had already failed. They were just too proud to admit it. And pride, like leverage, is a dangerous thing. Truth has weight. And at Lehman, it was buried deep. Janice wasn't alone in her warnings. Risk reports had piled up, ignored, deleted, sometimes rewritten. Whistleblowers whispered into darkness. Files were modified. Spreadsheets adjusted to hide volatility. There was one file, flagged in red. Asset sensitivity. Do not distribute. It outlined worst-case exposure scenarios, losses so catastrophic even bailout wouldn't help. Janice found it by accident on a shared drive. She clicked it, read it, reread it, whoa, huh, then printed it. It wasn't just bad news. It was proof. Proof they knew. Proof they chose silence. Her hands trembled as she slid it into her bag. Someone else had seen this too. Someone higher. But they had buried it. Not to protect investors. To protect themselves. The collapse wasn't a surprise. It was a cover-up. Janice didn't sleep that night. The report haunted her. If it leaked, it could destroy lives. But if it stayed hidden, it would guarantee more. At 3:00 a.m., she drafted an anonymous email to the SEC, then deleted it. Fear held her hostage. She thought of her son, her mortgage, her career. The next day, she took the file to her manager. He didn't flinch. "You didn't see this," he said. "And if you did, it means you accessed unauthorized data." That was it. Not shock. Not panic. Just threat. She realized then, the system was more than broken. It was rigged to punish those who noticed. Her silence was expected. Her complicity assumed. Her morality weaponized against her. That night, she didn't eat. She didn't speak. She just sat at the edge of her bed, heart pounding, wondering how truth became a crime. Then came the revelation. A leaked email, not hers but someone else's, made its way into a journalist's hands. It referenced internal knowledge of the toxic debt load months before the bankruptcy. The story hit headlines fast. Lehman knew. Hidden risk file surfaces. Markets jolted. Executives scrambled. Inside Lehman, paranoia erupted. Janice watched as it confiscated computers. Legal teams stormed conference rooms and whispered accusations flew. She wasn't the leaker. But she had held the same file. And now she was a target. Guilt by proximity. She heard her name mentioned in a closed-door meeting. The walls were thin. "Keep her quiet," someone said. This wasn't about blame anymore. It was about survival, theirs, not hers. The people in power weren't seeking truth. They were hunting liabilities. They offered her a deal. An early exit package. NDA included. "Sign here." What? "Walk away. Never speak of this again." The envelope sat on her desk, heavy, pristine, and cold. Her manager stood over her. "Take it," he said. "It's more than most will get." It wasn't a bribe. It was a muzzle. She looked up. "Did you know?" she asked. He didn't answer. Just walked away. In the envelope, silence was worth 6 months' pay. But silence had a cost. She opened a drawer and took out the printout. "They'll bury you," a friend whispered. "They'll try," she replied. Her hands shook as she slipped the file into a different envelope, not addressed to HR, but to the press. She wouldn't be complicit. Not anymore. Truth wasn't safe, but it was necessary. The story broke within 48 hours. Major outlets ran it. The evidence was undeniable. Financial malpractice, concealment, internal warnings, all ignored. Congressional hearings reopened. Executives were summoned. Janice didn't speak publicly. She didn't have to. Her truth was out now, echoing in headlines, in courtrooms, in history books yet to be written. But it came at a price. She lost friends. She was blacklisted from firms. Her reputation, tainted not praised. But she could look her son in the eye. "Why'd you do it?" he asked one night. She smiled faintly. "Because silence is easy, but silence helps no one." Outside, Wall Street continued to gleam. But for Janice, the world had changed. And even if justice never came for the guilty, she had delivered something they couldn't erase. The truth. The fallout became global. What began in a Manhattan office had become a contagion. Across Europe, banks teetered. In Asia, markets crashed. In small towns, families checked shrinking pensions. The shock wasn't localized. It was systemic. At home, Janice watched governments scramble to calm the panic. Bailouts. Stimulus. Emergency meetings. But it was too late. The trust had cracked. Her phone buzzed with news alerts. Markets down. Unemployment spikes. Evictions rising. She walked past shuttered shops and quiet streets. The hum of collapse everywhere. A barista she once knew was now homeless. A neighbor lost their retirement. People didn't blame Lehman. They didn't even understand what it was. But they felt the pain it left behind. The fire Lehman started had found fuel in every corner of the world. And no one could put it out. In Washington, the hearings began. Executives in crisp suits sat before Congress, offering rehearsed answers. "No one saw this coming," one said. Janice gritted her teeth watching the broadcast. "We did," she whispered. The camera zoomed in on Richard Fuld, Lehman's CEO, eyes narrow, face unreadable. He didn't apologize. He deflected. "We followed the rules." But the rules were bent in boardrooms like his. Lawmakers asked questions, but there was no fire in them. No rage. No real consequence. Billions lost. Millions harmed. But no handcuffs. No confessions. Janice felt something deeper than anger. She felt erased. The people who built this crisis were now rewriting its history. I want die now. And the world, overwhelmed, allowed them. Justice wasn't absent. It was avoided. Janice began writing again. Not reports. Not memos. Her story. Every night after her son went to bed, she typed, one word at a time, one wound at a time. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing clarity. In her small apartment, she built her testimony, not for the courts, but for the future. For anyone who would listen. "Here's what it felt like," she wrote. "Here's what they ignored." It was painful, but it was power. In those pages, she wasn't a victim. She was a witness. And in a world of spin and erasure, witnesses mattered. Her truth wasn't polished. It was raw, jagged, angry, and honest. And maybe, just maybe, someone would read it and understand. Not what Lehman was, but what it did. Months passed. The world adjusted to new norms, lower expectations, cautious spending, tighter rules. But beneath the surface, little had changed. The same people still shaped the future. The same loopholes waited to be used again. Janice returned to work, not in a bank, but at a non-profit advocating for financial reform. Smaller office. Lower pay. But real purpose. She taught workshops, met young analysts, warned them of patterns she had seen before. One student asked, "Would you go back?" She smiled. "Not unless I can burn the rulebook first." Her battle wasn't over. But now, she fought on her terms. Not to erase the past, but to prevent its return. One evening, Janice and her son walked through Midtown. The city pulsed with light again, rebuilt and roaring. But the scars remained, invisible to tourists, unforgettable to survivors. They passed the old Lehman building, now renamed, repainted, repurposed. He looked up. "You worked there, right?" She nodded. "Once, do you miss it?" he asked. She paused. "No, I miss who I thought we were." He took her hand. They kept walking. The skyline glistened above, but Janice no longer looked up for answers. She carried them within her now. The story wasn't over. But the chapter had ended. And for the first time in years she felt free. As the world moved forward, the consequences remained. Millions were unemployed. Retirement dreams vanished. Families broke under financial strain. And Lehman's ghost haunted boardrooms across the globe. Governments passed reforms, Dodd-Frank, oversight panels, new regulators. But the machine kept turning. Janice watched CEOs re-emerge with new companies, new titles, new fortunes. "They fell upward," she said in a lecture once, the class silent. But for people like her, the ones who'd lived the collapse, the damage was permanent. She met a man at a seminar who had lost his wife, not to death, but to despair. A mother who buried her child after eviction led to a health crisis. These were the real losses. Not market values, but human lives. The financial crisis was not history. It was ongoing, rebranded. Quiet. Night one. Unspoken. But still burning beneath the surface. Wine tondro. At home, Janice rebuilt slowly. Trust. Purpose. Direction. She no longer chased titles or quarterly bonuses. She planted herbs on her windowsill. She helped her son with homework. She started sleeping again. The quiet things, the ones she once sacrificed for spreadsheets and systems, returned. On weekends, she walked to the library, wrote by hand, met strangers without calculating their LinkedIn profiles. Her life had narrowed, but deepened. She didn't need applause. She needed peace. And sometimes she even found it. The world she once served had nearly broken her. But in leaving it, she discovered something unexpected. Herself. Not the strategist. Not the whistleblower. Just Janice. A woman who survived the fire and chose not to rebuild the same walls. But scars have memories. And sometimes they ache. One afternoon, Janice received an invitation. A roundtable on risk management reform. Hosted by the very institutions that once silenced her. She stared at the email, unsure. It felt like mockery. But then she remembered the students, the workers, the people still living in the aftershocks. She pressed ice. The room was all suits and handshakes. The moderator introduced her, Janice Carter, former Lehman executive, now reform advocate. She adjusted the mic. "Let's begin with honesty," she said. "We didn't fall because we were surprised. We fell because we were silent." For the first time, no one interrupted her. The room listened. Really listened. And for once, power bowed to truth, if only briefly. Later that evening, she walked the same route she used to take to Lehman, past the deli, the fountain, the subway entrance. But everything had changed. The building was now owned by another firm. Its name different. Its face familiar. She paused across the street, watching people exit. Young, eager, hungry. Just like she had been. "They don't know," she whispered. "Not yet. But maybe they would. Maybe they'd read. Maybe they'd ask harder questions. Maybe someone inside was already watching. Already doubting." Change didn't come from institutions. It came from individuals. Quiet ones. Brave ones. Alone at first, then many. She turned away and walked home, not in anger, but in hope. That night, Janice tucked her son into bed. "Tell me a story," he asked. She smiled. "A real one. The one where the lady wins," he said. She hesitated. Okay, she whispered. Once there was a woman who believed the system would protect her, but it didn't, so she stopped waiting. She fought back. She lost a lot, but she never lost herself. He yawned. Was she scared? She kissed his forehead. Every day, but she kept going. Outside, the city pulsed. Somewhere, another crash was waiting. Another crisis already brewing. But not tonight. Tonight was quiet. Tonight, the fire had dimmed. And the woman, she had survived. Time passed. The world moved on as it always does. News cycles changed. Markets recovered. People rebuilt. But Lehman remained, not in headlines, but in the quiet lessons left behind. Janice returned one day to the Lehman archives, now stored in a financial museum exhibit. A glass display held a redacted balance sheet, a trader's coffee-stained notebook, a replica of the final memo. She stood still, heart heavy. Artifacts of failure, someone murmured nearby. She disagreed. Artifacts of warning, she whispered. These weren't just relics. They were reminders of what happens when power is unchecked, when truth is ignored, when silence is bought. The world had already forgotten too much. But she hadn't. She couldn't afford to. Not when forgetting meant repeating. And repetition would be fatal. Outside the museum, tourists snapped selfies. Few looked up. Few paused. But Janice stood beneath the towering skyline and remembered every floor, every desk, every voice now gone. Her son tugged at her coat. You ready to go? She nodded, but looked back once more. I used to think this was everything, she said. Now I know better. He looked up at her, older now, understanding more than before. You taught me that buildings don't make people strong. People do. She smiled. He was right. The institution had fallen, but she had not. She had endured, changed, grown. Strength wasn't built in skyscrapers. It was built in choices, small, unseen, sometimes painful, but always hers. That was the legacy she would carry, not Lehman's. Her own. No. Later that week, Janice sat in front of a high school classroom. Guest speaker. Volunteer. She spoke not of Wall Street but of courage. Of choosing truth over comfort. You don't have to work in finance to feel the fallout, she told them. You just have to live in the world. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Would you do it all again? Janice paused. Yes. But I'd speak sooner. The class was silent. Moved. Moo. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't rich. But she was honest. And in a world built on illusion, that made her rare. She handed out pamphlets. Question systems, it read. Trust yourself more than your paycheck. The kids left buzzing. And for the first time Janice knew, her voice had weight again. On the anniversary of the collapse, news anchors returned to the story. 10 years later, they said. Montages rolled. Sound bites played. Economists debated recovery. But no one asked what was lost in the cracks. Not money, memory. Janice sat at her desk watching the coverage. No mention of whistleblowers. No names like hers. The camera showed buildings, charts, banks. But not people. Not pain. Why? She turned it off. Took out her journal. Began to write again. Not for headlines. For history. My name is Janice Carter, she wrote. I worked at Lehman Brothers. I warned them. They didn't listen. Then, with the same calm she once lacked, she added, but someone will. And maybe that was enough. Final scene. The sun rises over Manhattan. The city awakens alive with ambition, blind to its scars. People hurry. Phones ring. Deals begin. But in a small apartment window, a light glows early. Janice brews coffee. She looks out at the skyline, not with fear, not with regret, just with clarity. She opens her laptop. A new chapter waits. The world is far from fixed, but she's still here, still writing, still warning. And in that stillness is power. We don't remember the fall because it was fast. We remember it because someone lived to tell the truth. She exhales, hits send on her next article. A single click. A small act. But that's how fires start. And sometimes how they're prevented.